Hello. I hope everyone's well at home. My name is Avro Hepner, and this is the BDA producing BSL Blethers. Now, BSL Blethers' topic tonight that we're going to discuss is linked with our deaf schools, about our identity and about our culture, and how that fits together in our journey through life. So today, I'm so excited. We have two special guests who'll be joining us this evening, and they'll form the discussion group. And I think what's important for us all to discuss is identity as a whole and how our identity progresses through our life, and how in the past deaf schools were a great place for making sure that identity was fostered. So before I say anything else, I'd love to introduce Sally.
Hello there, hi.
Sally, so welcome to have you here tonight. Could you tell me just a wee bit about yourself, maybe your name, your background, and a bit about your school?
Of course. My name's Sally Work, and I come from a deaf family, and now I have my own deaf family as well. I stay in Falkirk, and that's a bit about me.
And what about your deaf school? Could you tell me about what schools you attended?
Yeah, sure. I went to primary school, then off into secondary, which was a mainstream school. So I've got experience of both a deaf primary school and a mainstream secondary.
So at the primary school, were you a day pupil?
Yeah, I was.
Okay, well, hold on to that, Sally. I'm going to dig a bit deeper later.
No
So our
problem.
second guest tonight is John. Hi, Avro. Thank you so much for coming, John. Again, would you like to just introduce yourself? Tell us about your school. Well, I'm John Denerley, and this is my sign name, John, and I live in Dumfries uh, area, and I've been there for 20 years. I previously was in England, and it was in Manchester, and I was a day pupil. Well, this is great because we've got you as a day pupil and also a deaf school. And also, Sally, you've got the experience of mainstream. So it'd be great just to talk a wee bit more about that and how our identity and our culture was maybe formed in the schools or came from the schools. But before we do that, I think we need to look at some old photos of Sally. So see, let's see if her face has changed. You can be the judge. This is Sally. And another picture of Sally a bit older.
Well, I think I look the same. What do you think? I
John, what do you think? I don't think she's changed a bit. Oh no, I
look
know
older
she's so sweet.
now.
How was your secret, Sally? How do
Oh,
you
I
look
can't give that
perpetually
away.
young? Oh, thank you so much for sharing your photos with us and our audience. So now we're going to see some photos of John. Let's see if he's changed at all. Oh, picture of John looking about 2 or 3. Another picture of John a wee bit older. John looking very smart in a suit. And a very beautiful picture of John staring right into the camera. So, what do you think, Sally? Same question to you. Do you think John's changed?
Oh, I couldn't say.
Well, I can tell you, I feel an old man, but I'm young at heart. That's funny, John. I totally agree. You know, I think anybody, if you were lost, we would be able to identify who Sally and John were just from those photographs. So let's get back to the topic at hand. So, really, starting with you, Sally, did you understand or recognize identity early on, or was it something you found out about later in life and you just went along without knowing? Tell me about your journey.
I mean, I don't really think I thought much about a deaf identity. It just felt like my normal life. I was part of a deaf family. Our first language was BSL at home anyway. I travelled to a deaf school. We had deaf staff. It was never something that was on my mind that I didn't know my identity, but
Uh-huh.
I think later on, when I was in the mainstream school, that's
How
when it
old were
started.
you?
Oh gosh, I would have been 12, maybe 11 and a half, 12, round about that age. That's when it really hit me when I moved to the mainstream school, because obviously, the majority are hearing and very few deaf. So, I didn't have as many peers there. I think I was lucky because there was about 7 or 8 of us, maybe up to 10 of us potentially, but all different ages. So that was definitely where it hit home.
Well, we'll definitely come back and explore that a wee bit more. What about you, John? Because Sally really didn't, it didn't impact her really until she went to secondary school. Yeah, I kind of had this similar experience because I come from a deaf family and I went to a day school. So my mother and father, their experience was boarding schools, and that was in Old Trafford at the time. And they used to tell me the stories, wonderful stories, about being there, but also extremely cruel stories about the food and everything else. But what we did realise was that that's where your identity was because you had your peers there. Now, when I went to the day school, although I was signing at home, I was at an oral school during the day. And I think I really, my identity was at home, but not at school. And I think even although I was at a deaf school, we were not allowed to sign. So I was, if you like, having to work like a hearing person. So, John, sorry, Sally, were you a sign in school or was it oral?
Yeah, I mean, I signed in primary, secondary, and also in the secondary mainstream school, but we relied on the teacher of the deaf.
Ah,
The mainstream teachers didn't sign, so it was the teacher of the deaf that signed to us. And I realised actually how much I relied on that teacher of the deaf who was with me all the time. So, in class, if the teacher of the deaf arrived late in the mainstream school and the teacher was already started, it was very nerve wracking. I'm the only one in that class that can't access what this teacher's saying. And I think I did have a very strong deaf identity. I realise now that I had a very strong deaf identity actually when I was in mainstream school.
so John, tell me about when you discovered your identity. Well, Avro, because I grew up in a BSL environment, from birth, I was exposed to the deaf club, deaf sports, lots of other activities that form part of the deaf world. But my peers, my classmates, they were getting taught to speak like me, but unfortunately they weren't getting access to sign language. So what was happening was that I could, jump from both worlds, if you like, but my friends were really relying on the speech. But then later on, what was happening was that I was coming and telling them stuff, stories and sign, which they were picking up from me, but the teachers were not happy about it and would give them into trouble because we were to speak and not sign. And I couldn't really understand, because I'd be going to the deaf club and, as I say, all these sort of sports and different events, and their identity was there, you know. And the other thing was that I didn't really have any adult role models. My mother and father at boarding school always had adult role models, but what happened when I was at school, all I had was people either the same age as me or around the same age. I suppose what you're sort of saying at a boarding school, you're growing there, you can actually see people growing literally, and getting older, and you can see them changing. So that does become role models. So, Sally, when you were growing up, I know you came from a deaf family. Was there any particular deaf role models that you had a good experience with at school?
Yeah, well, we had house mothers and house fathers
Ah,
when I was at school, and so for me that was quite normal. Do you know, our community is very small anyway, so we kind of knew them. My parents knew who they were, they
yeah.
knew who my parents were, they kinda knew our family. So, I mean, to me, that was just really normal life. I didn't view it as like a role model or anything, it was just normal life, I suppose. Um, I guess, there was an admin person I adored in the school, and I think that person there was just, amazing, but I don't really think there was anybody else really particularly.
That's so interesting because I've heard that from people that they've said that the house fathers and house mothers were really important role models, but that system is now really not there anymore. And what about you, John? Well, Avril, as I said, I was a day pupil, so I didn't have that boarding school experience. I mean, um, the boarding school was my mother and father's generation. That was very common then. But when it came to me, it was a day school for the deaf, but it wasn't sign language, it was spoken. So that part of it that my parents got, the sort of like the traditional storytelling or passing down, stories and things, we didn't get that. Yeah. So I think it was a case of when we were at school, we were almost brainwashed to thinking that we had to try and become hearing, and that meant losing any kind of deafness that was around us, but obviously when you um were there and there would be some teacher who would understand things, then you could get that rapport. But in my time we really didn't have that. Actually, John, I can remember actually you were involved recently with the Deaf Roots and Pride as a role model. You know, Interesting. So can I say to you, you think about, being there, how does that make you feel? Oh, Avril, it's amazing. See, when you connect with the children, your confidence, you just feel amazing. You can see the sign, and I'm happy. There's the children's choice, whatever method they feel is comfortable for them. In my time, we weren't a given choice. We're just not allowed. It was banned. You know, and now in the schools, it's fabulous. Children are getting access to deaf history and lots of different role models, lots of different deaf people in different jobs that they can now look at and say, I could maybe be like them. Different from my days when really the standard was very poor and they were looking for us to get into sort of manual labouring jobs. I mean, I can give you an example. I wanted to be a vet at school and I was told you're not good enough. You need to be really clever, like hearing people and be able to talk and read and write in English and hear. At that time we didn't have interpreters. So we were just told, oh, deaf people can't do that. That's the lot and we had to stick with that. And things have changed now. Sally, when you think about the classroom situation when you were at school and you remember I remember you were telling a wee story about your hearing aids. Could you share that with our audience?
Yeah, sure. Obviously, when I was young, I had my hearing aid with the box, and you used to always run with it and it hit off your chin. Do you remember? Oh, crumbs.
Oh yeah, we used to eat the wire too, remember?
If you were a bit hungry. So, as I get a bit older, I used to put it round to the side of me with the hearing aids in. But anyway, I remember this one time when I was in class and I had my jumper on and I'm sitting in class. And our regular teacher, our mainstream regular teacher, was off that particular day, and another person, I think a kind of interim teacher, came in and was speaking, and I'm thinking something doesn't feel quite right. But I don't know what this person's saying. Now, my hearing peers were kind of speaking around me, and I didn't really know what was going on. But then the teacher of the deaf came in, and I saw her having a conversation with the teacher. And it seemed quite an animated conversation. But what it turned out was this teacher thought that I had a Walkman in and I was listening to music. No idea and no awareness. I know nowadays it's a lot better. Teachers have much more awareness. But, back then, they just assumed I had a Walkman in and that I was ignoring them. They were speaking to me and I was ignoring them because I was listening to music.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, you think of it visually, it could be mistaken for um, you know, aids that hearing people use, but it's great that since then we've had more training and people being more aware. But
And then
you're
after
saying it
that, I
affected you?
became quite paranoid. I came quite paranoid thinking,
Ah.
what are they thinking of me? Like, are they going to think what I'm doing? So mainstream was quite tricky. It was quite a tricky environment.
So, do you think having a hearing aid, do you think that's part of your deaf identity or?
John, do you want to come in?
Well, okay, thanks, Sally. Well, I used to go in a taxi to school, but then when I got older, when I was about 15, you were told you had to go on a train and a bus to get to school every day. It took over 1.5 hours just to get there because I was outside Manchester and I had to travel. Anyway, I wouldn't put my hearing aids on in the bus or the train because I was scared of unwanted attention. Because sometimes it would whistle and I wouldn't be aware of it, and people would stare at me, and then I would go, oh no. So, what I used to do was not put them on, and just as soon as I arrived at school gates, the hearing aids went on. Soon as school finished, straight in the bag they went. And I've been doing this day in, day out. Anyway, there was one day, I don't know what happened, but I managed to leave the hearing aids in the bus. Well, I went to the school, the teacher went berserk. You've lost those hearing aids. They've cost a fortune. I was getting in so much trouble. I was in such a state that after it, I decided to wear them all the time. But see, when I left school, they went straight in the bin. Well, hearing aids do have uses. So, what about you, Sally? Did you stick it in the bin?
Because my family were all signing anyway, I never really bothered much with it, you know. When I left school, you know, the minute I was able to, those hearing aids were straight in the bin like you, John.
that's that's quite common. So when both of you think about, when you were young and think about how you had deaf schools and compare it to now, where we tend to have, is it deaf units or children are mainstream, do you think it's more important now that we emphasize or talk about identity and culture?
Well, you know, at my time, we were very close in school. You know, everybody felt like my brother and sister. You know, and after leaving school, I'm still in touch with those people that I met back in school. You know, we're still there and we still reminisce about the old days. We have all our in-house jokes and you know, those memories are still very much there from primary. When I think about my mainstream schooling time, some of those people I'm still friendly with, but a lot less than what I did in primary school. I think if there's a bigger number, there was a bigger number in you know, obviously in primary, there was a smaller number of us in secondary. And I think that, you know, you leave school and they didn't keep in touch. And I know it's their choice, you know, they don't have to keep in touch, but I think, you know, there's that. So I think when I think of my experience of what happened then compared to deaf schools, I think deaf schools back in the day, we very much kept in touch. If you compare with now, it seems that they don't keep in touch like we used to. You know, and you maybe don't have that little collective from back in the day. And I think also because they're very isolated in mainstreams, there's maybe only one of them or maybe two. So then it becomes like things like youth club are really important where they can actually find their deaf identity. You know, because quite a lot of our young deaf children come from hearing families and they're very, very isolated and they don't have those identities. So going to youth club, after school activities, that kind of thing, is really important for them.
And more deaf role models, I assume, Sally. John, you know, when my parents went to boarding school, I can remember them telling me quite clearly there was a rich, strong, vibrant culture. Everybody knew how everybody behaved. They knew the norms, they knew the rules. Signing was a prevalent language. And when they would tell me the stories at that time, to me, it's almost like Narnia. It's an unbelievable place. They would talk about their jokes and things like that. And when I look at the experience of being, although be it I was at a deaf school, but it was a day school, it was a completely different experience. Like Sally, there was maybe a few of us there. Maybe there was definitely under sort of 100, just sort of but my parents was 400 at a time. And what I also noticed is the kids who were at the boarding school, their reunions, they have them regularly and they meet up. But for some of us, when there's maybe only been 7 of us in the school, that's just a big effort, when a lot of the time, it might be that they weren't the people you want to be with. So I was very lucky though, because my father took me to the deaf club, so I was able to get involved in the youth club and everything else. So my identity just strengthened, and I was starting. as compared to sort of people maybe in mainstream or just in a small groups that don't have that access. But I agree, Avril. I think it's more important now when we look at the demographics and how deaf children are educated. There is more isolation there, and I think it's so important that they have more deaf role models and identity and culture is taught to them. I think it's a lovely way of explaining culture when we talk about how we share our memories, how we can empathize with each other and of being deaf and our journeys. But you mentioned the youth club and how that's so important. And thankfully in Scotland we have a number of youth clubs. But there's something else I wanted to check with you if you thought this was valid, because it's something that's been raised and it's about deaf identity via sports. Now, I don't know personally your experience if you were involved in any sports or deaf sports, whether you're involved in the football, the darts, the pool, or whatever. But being in a team that really allowed identity to spread and grow. I think, John, what about yourself? Avril, you're right. I was very competitive, and all of our competitions was versing other deaf people. And the first thing we would be doing was, what school are you from? Where are you from? What's happening to you there? And then we became friends. As now, the competitions tend to be amongst hearing people, and so we don't get that opportunity to share our culture and our language with other deaf people from around the country. And I suppose that's what the sports thing, it brought us all together to one spot and kept that unity there. And I suppose it's not just about the people who are taking part in the sports, but there was the people that we came to watch and that social life that came with it. What about you, Sally? Do you ever remember anything like that?
I mean, I didn't ever do sports, but I remember, the youth clubs certainly. I think after school, I think I tried sports once, but I never really get into it.
Well, I'm just what I'm establishing is that the breeding grounds, if you like, for your identity and culture are our schools, our deaf clubs, our youth clubs, but also our sporting events. Because what I can remember, it's things about when it was the Olympics, you get involved in deaf sports, and you started to open up all this new language to you that you didn't have access to before. Uh, like even the World Federation of the Deaf, there'd be people would be congregating and coming from all over the world, so you were getting to share your identities, but have this overall deaf identity that each of us knew instinctively. So that really did sort of open things up, and that's there for young people now.
I mean, hopefully, yeah.
Well, Avril, you're right. You've brought something to mind. After competitions, we always had a sort of dance afterwards. So that social event was there for everybody to mix and to really just share our stories. I mean, I think back, even just talking about it just now, they were wonderful times, you know. And I think when I look at social media now, I wonder about identity, for young people, because in our past we knew our language, and the language was from the schools. Whatever you tended, the sign language, you could identify it from your area of the, or rather the school. As now, I think children are maybe picking up stuff and they're not realizing that they're basically different accents and all that. Um, Also, I think, because deaf clubs are not there anymore, you know, I think there needs to be some sort of like hub or something to expose young people to their identity and culture. I do remember, John, you're absolutely right about our evenings. Yes, even the females came if it was a male sport, and we'd have our sort of our dance and everything else. And I can remember it was almost a sort of courting venue, because, there was maybe a few of you in that area, and then all of a sudden you would get new people coming in. So I can remember that evening, that just sharing of experiences. And that was really, really prevalent back in in sports. But when we think about the schools, particularly both Sally, your experience, and John's, did you feel that your deaf identity grew stronger as you progressed through school and then get better when you left school, or or you lost it? Could you give us a wee description how you kind of would map your identity? Do you feel it was the same?
Well, for me, when I left school, I missed my friends. I really missed my friends. You know, you would see them every single day. You were there every single day chatting, having a great time. When you left, you maybe you went to college or whatever, everybody kind of went their own direction and their own path. But if I'm thinking about my deaf identity, I don't think it lessened. I think it's just that I then started taking my own path in life. So that's quite a tricky question actually to unpack.
Oh, you're right, Sally. That is a difficult question. I can remember some of my friends having such a strong identity, um, and then others once had left school, um, being more maybe like at the time not being having a strong identity and getting a stronger identity. There was others that came from a hearing school, sorry, a hearing family environment that relied on the deaf clubs as a source of like the second family, because at home everything was spoken. Well, we touched just there on families there, John, and we know that most deaf children are born, babies are born to hearing families. We know that we've got this new BSL Act that came to Scotland 2015, and we know that the approaches are very different from our time. There's more of a social model there, but we've still got a long way to go. And you mentioned families were a key thing for deaf people. So, can you tell if, well, John, you'd mentioned it, or Sally? Who wants to start? Tell us about your experience of families. Well, Avril, I think the biggest problem for deaf children is the fact that 90% of deaf babies are born to hearing families who probably have no knowledge of sign language or deafness. You know, at that time, when I was at school, the parents told the teachers told parents, do not sign with your child, only speak. Um, And my mother was the same at school. She was taught oral, but my father was a natural native signer. And in our days, there really was, we don't do this, we don't do that. It's different now because we're learning BSL through activities within the classroom. You know, we're also learning about our Scottish heritage being deaf in the similar ways that the Scottish Gaelic community want to have pride and, pass on their storytelling, um, uh, traditions and everything else. And I think for us, it is the young people just do need that strong identity. And I think we have that. You're right, John. I think with the Act coming in, um, it includes and encourages and promotes deaf identity and culture and the sharing of that culture with the hearing community too. So that's really good. I'm going to just pop and look at the questions that have come in. I can see they've started to come in, so I'm just going to have a look at our audience questions and see if I can pick one. There's so many. Honestly, there is so many questions here. I'm just seeing which one I'm going to pick. Okay, so we've got Stuart Parkinson up, and Stuart's question is, imposter syndrome is the internal psychological experience of feeling phony in some area of your life, despite any success that you've achieved in that area. Would you agree that some deaf people that have joined the deaf community later in life as mainstreamers may feel that an imposter, like a fake deaf person?
Well, actually, I've got an example of one story. It was actually my birthday, and inviting people, a mixture of people from like my mainstream school and my other friends. So it was a bit of a mix that were coming along. And we were wanting to kind of catch up and chat about old times. And there was one person that was feeling really left out. So I get what you mean about the imposter syndrome. So I'm thinking maybe that is maybe a thing.
So maybe what we really maybe need to think about that is think about the people who maybe feel like that, because if they're
Mhm.
not getting sign at school, then maybe that's something that we could take preventative measures on. I think you're absolutely right, Avro. I think the deaf community should be welcoming deaf people into our community, regardless of the educational journey that we have. I think there is an attitude change that we need that needs to take place, and I think that can happen. I think, when we share our stories like Sally and I, we can talk about the old times and laugh about things like that. But I think what we have to do is make sure and be mindful about if anybody's feeling left out, because I've seen it myself that people maybe have lost their identity or went to the hearing world and then came back, so it's important. Oh, thanks. I think that's really good to reinforce that, guys. We've got another question in from, I think it's regarding the lack of deaf clubs. I think it's coming up on the screen. It's Carol Doherty. And it's about the decline of deaf clubs as maybe a focus for the BDA to maybe implement new growth and a new resource. So what do you think of that? The BDA does have the BDA youth. You know, I'm not saying it's the solution, but maybe it's something as a whole party of solutions, a one measure and a solution.
Well, I'm really glad to see that other deaf organisations are starting to deaf-led organisations, that youth clubs are deaf-led. That's really good. I think it's really important for our deaf children to see other deaf adults that are taking over and leading those clubs. I think that's really important.
John? Yes, Avril, deaf clubs. I mean, they're the heart of the community. I mean, I know society changes, and I know that there's lots within the hearing community. Their social clubs have shut down and everything else. I mean, I accept all of that, but it was the heart and soul. It was the beating heart of the deaf community. That's where we went to share news. That's where we went to catch up in news, not just news about ourselves, about news in general. It's how we shared everything. And we also had positions of responsibility within the Deaf Club, which meant there was role models there. So I think we need to encourage young people. I mean, I need to encourage deaf organisations, in particular about NDCS as well. I won't go into, but I really would love us to start working together, and I recognise that we need to meet the local needs of our young people. I think it's important that all organisations, can get involved, and particular organisations that represent deaf people. I think it is great to see deaf people in those leadership roles, because then that inspires young deaf people, and it also lets them know that it can be done and it's not out with their capability.
Mhm.
Okay, back to the questions. That was a great question there. As I say, there's lots of questions. I'm just scanning down. We have another question in, and this is about the youth clubs, and it's from Daniel P. Mahoney. So, my concerns about deaf clubs and youth clubs, because of the low number all over the UK, and in the past, previous generations benefited from that. Their culture and their identity was solidified in there. And Daniel knows that because his both his deaf parents has deaf parents, and the real worry is that international sign as well is maybe sort of bleeding into our own language. So our language is sort of maybe getting, there's cracks in it. Do you know, that's interesting because it's made me that question's made me think about like when people were telling jokes and stories or poetry or drama. We didn't have recorded devices then, you know, and it's now young people and they have that. So when I see anything that's there, um, of the old times, I like to show it to young people, but I do accept that modern things happen, but I really do think we should have some kind of resource, something that's it's able to be collected and making sure that the language is not just we're just going to let it disappear, because it could be that our language is changing because of this more of a global presence and global mobility. So we should be protecting the language as it is just now, and we can't stop the world from changing. Change is the only constant. So, yeah, I think you're right, though, that I think we should be recording for our archives, but also to help with identity and culture. You know, so I think we really need to make sure that we get that. And I think each deaf person has their own responsibility as well to make sure that we pass that information on to the next generation. Okay, we have another question, and this is from Erin. And Erin's question is about if you agree that deaf school helped you to find your deaf identity, or is there other deaf factors, like maybe having a deaf family, attending deaf clubs, etc., that are all part of your identity? And do you feel you needed to be attending deaf schools to find your deaf identity? What do you think? Do you think that's important, having been at a deaf school? Who we getting to go first? Do you agree? Disagree?
Hmm, well, I mean, I was really lucky because I had a deaf family, but those that didn't, they were also lucky that they had a hearing family. But I had a family that could take me to deaf club, that we all signed, that we signed at home. Others didn't have that same opportunity. If I'm thinking specifically about school, is that the most important thing for children, for young people? I think it definitely depends whether their family thinks a deaf identity is important. Because if they don't think it's important, that's definitely going to affect how that young person identifies. So I think it's about, making sure that, yeah, they get that identity from both home and school.
Sally, could I just ask you, do you remember you told me that deaf identity and culture were really important for your well-being? Could you explain a wee bit more about that?
Right, well, if I think back to my time, it's different from my children's time. There's a huge difference in what they go through compared to what I went through. It's about that ability to have peers, etc. I think our children that are mainstream now are very isolated. They're very lonely. There are very few numbers of deaf children in schools that are able to share with one another. So what happens is, I'll talk about my experiences back in the day, and my kids really wish they had the same opportunities. So we go to deaf events, we go to youth clubs, we go everywhere we can to mix with other people that use the same language, and to allow my kids to mix with other kids their age. And sometimes, it really affects their well-being. Maybe they go along to somewhere and they realise there's nobody of their age. They've got no peers their age that they can mix with or socialise with. It really affects their well-being. Sign language is such a powerful thing, and it really, they really have to have those peers.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Sally said. It's so important for kids. You know, I mean, we've said when the kids were all together in the boarding schools, they were a family. They had shared experiences. And I think when sometimes when the kids were at school and then go back to the hearing families, their identity maybe was diluted. I think now, and or rather in my day, peripatetic teachers would come into the school
and they would usually be teachers of the deaf. And recently I was teaching at a deaf school, and they really could see that the identity was absolutely rich there. And I think that's because all the children were mixing and were feeding and learning off each other. I want to just go back to just pick up on, both mentioned about being at school, being surrounded with people who were like you, who shared the same language, the same culture, the same identity. And there were so many in primary school. And then you went to secondary school, and that became a lot less. But then when you left school, I'm assuming it got a lot less. There wasn't as many deaf people. So did you find that your identity took a knock then?
Well, like I say, when I went to mainstream, it was a real kind of, I had to adjust very quickly. When I left, gosh, even more so, it really was a big impact.
Yeah, Sally, you have a different experience from me with mixing with hearing people. I came from a deaf family, deaf school, until I left school. And that's when I was involved in a youth training scheme at that time. And I was floundering my confidence and everything, because I realised that I was now in a completely different world where I didn't know the rules and the norms and what was the things to do. My sanctuary was at home, because at home I knew the rules, I knew the norms, I knew everything, and I was confident in there, and I knew how to behave. But when I left school, I was now in this completely strange world where I didn't know how to behave. So my confidence took a battering, really. That's interesting, John, to hear it from someone who had been in such a vibrant, deaf bubble, if you like, for want of a better word. And then that bubble bursts when you get into the real world, and you found yourself in an unsettled ground. But did you become stronger as a result of that, or did your deaf identity get stronger? Did it help in a way, maybe? Oh, you might be right, but I think the key is it's the support and the resources. When I'm saying that I was amongst deaf people, I'm not just talking about they were just there. Those deaf people were supporting me, they were instructing me, they were teaching me stuff. I was learning things from observing them, from just the stories, the backup, the support, the advocacy. So even when I left school, I would be going back to deaf community and sharing my experience, which meant that other people we could share their experience and tell me the tools and the tricks that they did to navigate their life through that.
I
What about you,
mean,
Sally?
yeah, if I think about, you're talking really here about resilience, aren't you? So I think when you've got your own deaf child, that resilience, that ability to fight for your rights, that ability to stand up and assert yourself becomes really strong. Obviously we are
Mhm.
signing family, but my children are in mainstream school. When they're home, they've got a really strong deaf identity, but it does make you very resilient and want to fight for what's right for your children.
Oh, Sally, you're so right. You're so right. Um, my parents, as I said, were deaf, and they campaigned tirelessly for a better education, for more rights, for any rights for me. They campaigned for all of my family and all the generations. And if you think about it, my children that are deaf, my parents have been fighting for 3 generations, just to try and look for improvement. And we have been getting there slowly but surely. Well, we have another question. It's just about to pop up on our screen. And this question is from Margaret McLean. So Margaret's question is, she's saying that she's similar to Joan because she came from a deaf family and a boarding school experience, but she struggled at college because in her day there was no interpreters. So I'm wondering, how did you cope with that? Is that something that you experienced? Thank you for sharing, Margaret. That was amazing. Another question's come in, and this question is it's from Shaz, and her question is about, children and young people, or not, what ask deaf children, young people about their identities. Why not just ask them straight? Unfortunately, tonight we don't have any young people here with us tonight, and the focus was really about us reminiscing about what it was like in the old days and how we've progressed. If we have, what things have been good, and really to compare and contrast what it's like for a modern day young person. But that's fantastic. Thank you, Shaz, for that. That's something that we will take up. We've got another question coming in from Erin, and that's about both of your own experiences. So the question really is to say, do you feel that deaf children and young people have a gap in their sort of identity because of the way education system is working now, and that something like the Deaf Roots and Prides transition or a youth club or the BD Youth, do you think these are useful tools for them?
Well, just one idea off the top of my head. As we know, lots of our children are mainstreamed and they're fairly isolated. Why can schools not join together? Why can they not plan to have maybe a collegiate approach where they all get together to allow these very much isolated young people to get in and be around one another? Could they run some kind of after school activities that happen once a week or once a fortnight that allow these young people to get together? Just off the top of my head.
You're absolutely right, Sally. Connections are so important
Mhm.
because connections can lead to wonderful new friendships that can build a lifetime friendship. What about yourself, John? I mentioned earlier on about, the BDA youth, and they had a leadership program. I was in the committee and went through various stages of that. So all of these kind of skills, um, you know, we were empowered there by our peers and our role models. And we were also said that, we had to look after our future. And I do worry about young people and their identity in the future. N- John, you mentioned the future, which is quite timely to bring that up now. You both are parents of deaf children. So, how do you sort of reconcile the fact of your own experience of school, parents before it, and then your young children's experience now that we don't have the same access to the resources we had in our day or our parents' day? How does that make you feel? I know it's a difficult question, but do you have the solutions? Because
Mm,
you are parents of deaf children experiencing this right now.
I mean, John.
Well, I mean, my child goes to a school and deaf school, and I'm heartbroken because it's very different. I think, my parents gave me so much information. And the other thing is that these deaf children think they're the only deaf child in the whole world. They don't think anybody looks like them, talks like them, thinks like them, behaves like them. They think that it's only them. They don't think the age. So I think it's really important to keep the connections to the deaf community in all of its forums. Um, get young people back into clubs or form committees so that young people can learn those skills that will help them out in later life. Boarding schools, it is a thing of the past, and that's what change happens. But we accept we've got schooling with some young people in a mainstream, maybe being the only person, and then others going to a deaf school. I wonder about the mental health though for our young people in the future.
I mean, what I would like to see is deaf clubs opening back up and welcoming our young children. Because quite often what they'll say is, oh, deaf kids can't come to the club, or it happens ad hoc. I think it would be fantastic if something could be permanently set up for our young people. As we say, there's the mainstreaming in the schools, but some of those schools, there's BSL teaching, but they have to travel there to do that. What about our young kids? They need, it's about, as you say, that, looking up to those deaf role models, seeing that identity that is there. Sometimes it's your luck if your school has a great deaf role model, but it very much is a postcode lottery, and so it's so ad hoc.
Thank you. Thank you for being so honest there. Margaret McLean is talking about deaf role models here, and she's saying she thinks it's important that deaf role models visit mainstream schools.
Mhm.
And I can see from you nodding that you both agree. So thank you, Margaret, for raising that. Because particularly for young deaf people at mainstream schools, they're not getting access. Um, and I think it's a case of that what we have to do is we have to be the baton carriers, like in a relay race we used to do, and we carry the torch for our young people and the way that our parents did before. Now, we're lucky in Scotland, we have the BSL Act, Scotland Act 2015, which really is about uh, promoting and encouraging deaf role models and choice in schools. And what we want to do is make sure that deaf young people have a can do attitude rather than feel that they're limited by the fact that they're deaf. So you'd mentioned in the past, Sally, earlier about you had house mothers and house fathers. Did they have a kind of role like that?
I mean, what you would find is you maybe didn't want to speak to your teachers, for example, but you would know the house mother and house father really well, so you'd feel more
Ah,
connected. Yeah, it's like, yeah, as you say, it's like that empathetic ability to talk to somebody, and you could just kind of go and speak to them and get some of your worries and concerns out. That was so important for us.
yeah, you're right, Sally, because when I was at school, I was not comfortable at school. And if anything happened, I felt I wasn't getting empathy at school. But as soon as I went home, oh my goodness, I was getting it right away because we were the same. We shared so many things that my parents could understand what it was like to be a deaf person at school too. We were the same.
Yeah,
And all,
absolutely. When they're, if you have your baby and they're born, if you're a hearing parent, you're going to be in that kind of panic mode, aren't you? You don't know, you've never met another deaf person. It's maybe the first time you've ever come across that. You're really worried. So you need that information. You need to know what's happening, and you need to make the right decisions for your child's future. I need to have that support there for parents, for them to allow them to feel, there is opportunity out there. From a really young age, we don't want to see language deprivation. We know that language comes in from 0 to 5. That's the key time to get language for our young people.
that's so interesting. When we talk about identity, really does there's so much, because when you think about uh, um, all the bringing deaf role models in can influence deaf young people. We've got deaf teachers now, we've got our youth club where there's youth leaders there. So we have the organisations, as you mentioned, that are deaf led. So maybe it's about exposing, those young people who are not getting that to us to let them know what lies beyond the boundaries of the school. So that again, it's about getting in there early and maybe preventative approach rather than, letting them experience maybe when they leave school feeling lost and not part of anything.
Mhm.
Um, so that feeling when you're sort of around everybody that's deaf and you just know you get it, you understand. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like being at home, having that confidence, being around that whole world where everybody just gets you and you feel like you're home.
I honestly, I mean, I have to say the BDA from its inception, the political stance it used to take and what it takes now, the youth stuff and how it survived in all this time is really, we have to make sure that this organisation continues. It's amazing. I mean, have a responsibility to pass it on. And I couldn't agree more, John. I think, again, just to reiterate what we said earlier on, it's about all of us having that responsibility. You know, we have to make sure that we look after our future generations in the way our older generations looked after us. Would you believe we've nearly hit an hour? I can't believe it myself. Let me just check and have a look and see if there's any other questions that we've not covered yet. Oh, hang on 2 seconds. I see one coming in. It's from Shaz, and she mentions, or rather, Shaz has mentioned about why don't we think about creating new deaf hubs, and then we can make sure that all deaf people, regardless of ethnicity, religion, diversity, whatever, all deaf people can come together the way it used to be in the Deaf Club. Maybe that's a good thing. No segregation. We're just deaf.
Mhm.
Oh, I love that question because in the olden days we did have lots of deaf clubs, and you're right, though in some ways they were very male white dominated. So, you know, younger people who maybe came from a different background weren't maybe welcomed, but also our younger people, it was difficult for us to survive in there with these old fashioned rules. So I really do like this idea of like grassroots hubs appearing, and where people can share the diverseness of being deaf as well, because we belong to so many other groups as well as being deaf, and we should be welcoming everybody into that group. Sally, do you want to add something?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it would be amazing, wouldn't it, if it was somewhere central, some kind of a hub, whether it be one hub that everybody went to or we had several hubs, I would love that.
And the thing is, in Scotland, when we look at the how people travel, Scotland, we're very used to traveling around. We used to travel from club to club all around Scotland. It was just part of our culture. But COVID hit, and that's not been happening. So, you know, it could be that um, that's happening in schools now because of COVID, that people are not getting back into the community. So it could be that we have to really connect again, build confidence in people, and get them to get back in mixing.
Yeah, I mean, if I think back in my day, um, I don't remember visiting other schools ever. My mainstream, I think I was quite lucky because there were schools round about, mainstream schools round about. So we'd maybe go to watch, you know, like pantos at Christmas. All the schools would come together to watch that, or BSL stories. We'd all get together to watch the BSL story. I loved that, the BSL story times that we went along to. It was great. But they happened occasionally, you know. So, you know, everybody had their own school trips, but they were very kind of, you know, if you didn't have many in your school, it was a very small group of you that were going out doing that trip. Whether that was, you know what it was like, you would go skiing or whatever. But it would be great, you know, getting together and seeing new faces and meeting new friends.
So almost like we go from our days when schools were competitive with each other, we're
Mm.
looking for schools to be more supportive of each other and looking about where they can take the deaf young person's needs and put that at the centre. You know, because people have mentioned there has gaps, and
Yeah,
maybe that's one
support.
of the solutions to the gaps. But just going back to the BDA, and I believe the BDA has a responsibility to be lead organisation, and the BDA used to organise amazing rallies, and everybody would come from the four corners of the UK, and we would share our diverse identities, but our common deaf identity and culture. Well, as I have said, we've actually now over the hour. I can't believe it. There's still questions coming in. So I think we'll just have one more question. And this is from Janet. And Janet's question is, it should be coming up on our screen. So Janet Wardle Peck, totally agree. Well, it's all of our collective responsibilities to work together to create a better future for our deaf people. More of a comment, but
Oh,
thank you and thanks for watching. So as I said, Janet's just concurring with us that it's each individual's responsibility, and as a collective, we need to take this forward. Thank you. Sean, we've got a question in from Sean, and he's asking, do you think that we need more deaf role models and more GNC qualified youth workers as well? Because they could then work in schools during term time, outside of term time, or outside of school time. What do you think? Oh, I think it's so important to give the opportunity to any kind of education event, sport, anything at all, a program of events, and making sure that the access is there, whether it's via an interpreter or via a deaf person. We need someone to take the reins and actually establish that. In the past, the BDA did all of this. This is what they did that on our behalf, but we need that training absolutely. You're right, John. I can remember in the old days there was lots of youth work there, but now, it could be a solution is that we have trained youth workers who are deaf that can actually work within the schools. Oh my goodness, we've went over 1 hour. Because we're just a few minutes left, I'll actually over. I'm going to put the floor over to you, both Sally and John, and really give the final word to you. So if there's any tips or any advice you want to give a young deaf person out there.
Oh, I mean, I think it's about us as older deaf people sharing our stories, sharing that oral tradition, making sure our young people are getting access to that, and hopefully, seeing our young people become our future leaders. We need them as much as they need us. Yeah, that's it.
Absolutely.
Working together.
And John? Well, I hope that anybody out there that's been watching our discussion tonight realizes how important it is for children to dream and dream big, that they can achieve anything they want in the same way as a hearing child. I would want to make sure that deaf role models continues, because that's what inspires a child to dare to dream. And with that, we will see them becoming leaders. Well, that's amazing, John, because you're right. That's the pathway that enables our young and empowers our young people to achieve their goals. So, without further ado, thank you to our audience at home. Thanks for your questions. And a special thank you to both Sally and John for giving up your time and for participating in our BSL Blethers tonight. A bye bye from all of us.
Thank you. Bye now.